Welcome everybody to another episode of the Japanaholic podcast, a podcast surrounded by topics about Japan discussed by one certified Japanaholic. I am your host, Taylor Fry, and today I'm going to be going alone for this week, so I hope you enjoyed the last 4 episodes with Brody and Alex. Those two will possibly be back on in the near future, especially Brody, because we got a trip to Japan coming up here, not in June. I'll discuss more about that later in the episode, because sadly that's been postponed, because everything's been postponed thanks to the COVID-19 virus, or the COVID-19 COPD-19 virus, coronavirus, whatever you want to call it. I don't freaking know. Today on this episode of the Japanaholic podcast, I've gotten 3 cultural differences that from Japan and the United States that I want to discuss. Now, these 3 are more on the typical business side of the Japanese spectrum. If you plan on moving to Japan to work for a Japanese company, especially if it's a typical Japanese company, yes, there are differences between a Japanese company and a typical Japanese company. A typical Japanese company has, I want to say, 2 out of these 3 that I'm going to be listing off here shortly soon. And some Japanese companies, they don't usually use 2 out of the 3 of these. They usually cater towards more foreigner kind of employees. I could be wrong, and correct me if I am wrong. So, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode, because it is going to be a little different. I'm usually more of a guy who would spitball like anime facts or anime topics, especially in the past few weeks where I've only discussed about animes and some Japanese culture-ish kind of things. Remember that this podcast is about Japan, and anime is a part of Japan, but the bigger picture about the Japanaholic podcast is the fact that we're going to be talking about Japan and some major topics all around the country of Japan. If that makes sense. Okay. So, before I get into the first fact here, I want to let you guys know that yes, there are many differences in cultures if you're talking about like France, Italy, Britain, Germany, Sweden, China, India, just to name off several of many different countries that have different cultures. But today I'm just going to focus mainly on Japan versus United States of America. Why? 2 reasons. One, the main reason is because I live in America still. Okay? I still live in America. Okay? I have not lived in Britain. I have not visited Germany. I've not visited anywhere other than America and Canada. As of right now. So, yeah, there's that. The second reason is because this country kind of gets compared a lot with different cultures. So, there's that. Let's go ahead and let's get this underway, shall we? So, the first one I want to talk about today is the fact that Japan is more of a collectivist culture, whereas the United States is more of an we like to do things more on our own, I guess, is what I'll say. There's a specific term for it, but I can't say it because English. But to be more specific, the Japanese culture places importance on groups and communications and communities. Excuse me. Satisfaction and pride are meant to be found within the group you belong to. However, in the United States, people tend to find satisfaction in their own accomplishments, and people tend to focus on their own aspirations. And if you know anything about Japan, you'll find this an example in the Japanese business culture, where in Japan, employees tend to work for one company for their entire lives, whereas in the United States, people will sometimes jump from company to company, depending on the person, I guess. You know, because you want to find that one sweet company that'll pay good and have good coworkers. But in Japan, once you find that one company, you have to stick with that one company through its pros and its cons for your entire life, I guess. Now, that is a big pro in the Japanese culture, and then that is also a big con in the Japanese business culture. So, you can take that as you want. If you're more of a person who likes to work by themselves, then this is kind of a con that you would have to see in Japan. That you would see a lot, especially because if you're wanting to work in Japan, you're probably going to have to become one of those kinds of guys that has to rely on a bunch of teammates, rely on a bunch of coworkers. And if you're a person, I guess I'm like this way, who tends to work better on their own, it's not going to be quite the experience. However, if you're fine with working with other people, fine with working with coworkers and other stuff, kind of what, the collectivist culture is in Japan, then you could possibly work the kinks out. And I can see this as a pro, as somebody who likes to work by themselves. I have this podcast by myself with a few special guests every once in a while. I can totally work out the kinks in the collectivist culture in Japan, I guess. Because here in America, there tends to be people who do work better in the collectivist culturist kind of thing. People would rather work with a bunch of people rather than working by themselves, and I can totally understand that. But there's also, the other side of the aspect is people here in America like to work by themselves. They like to freelance. They like to, not work for one specific company for the rest of their lives. And then you got people who just, kind of like independent artists or independent workers who just actually enjoy working all by themselves and not have to worry about, specific deadlines set by their peers or that sort of stuff. Personally for me, I fit in that kind of category because it's like with a podcast, since I'm the one producing it, I'm the one editing it, I don't have to worry about deadlines. I don't have to worry about anything. As long as I get the episode up by Wednesday at 10:30 in the morning, Eastern time, I call it a successful day. I work out the kinks in the audios. I'm not much of an audio guy myself. I just try and make sure the audio sounds good so it doesn't, when you listen to this on a speaker or on headphones or whatever, it's, not noisy like in my first three episodes when it was called Drive Time Discussion Time when I was in a car. Okay, looking back, that was probably a terrible idea to do that, so. Looking back, I really didn't think that was a good idea to do that. I thought that was pretty cool at first, but no, not anymore. But could I see myself working with, like, a producer, working with a special guest in the future and all that sort of stuff? Yeah, of course. I'm kind of like that kind of person who, while I am in the more, individual-ish kind of area, I like to work by myself. I can work with other people in the very near future, once I get more and more comfortable with that sort of thing. So, I think I'll wrap that up. I think I'll wrap up that first topic with that. It's that if you live in the United States, you'll tend to find people who love to work by themselves, but you'll also find those people who love to work in a collectivist culture-ish kind of thing. Japan is completely full of collectivist culturist people. People who, because if you live in Japan, you gotta work with everybody else. You gotta work with other people, and it kind of ties in with the second one that I want to talk about. This one's also in the business part of Japan. Okay, because like I said, these three that I'm going to be talking about here, they're not like the basic society changes, okay, that everybody on YouTube and on, and even other podcasts will talk about. These three are like the more, I want to say advanced, because it's like these three you would think off the top of your head at first. But these three is, like I said, if you're planning on moving to Japan, I would recommend having these three in the back of your mind, okay? So the second one is if you do plan on working in a collectivist culture business in Japan, which I'll say this before I actually get to the second point. There are Japanese businesses that have that collectivist culture, but there's also Japanese businesses where they work with the foreigners. They work with, they're not the Japanese, the typical Japanese business. There's some that will work with you to help with your hours, so you're not, becoming one of those overpaid salarymen that is so popular in the culture. And in the the typical Japanese businesses, you will find that social hierarchy is important in Japan. And that's the second thing that I'm going to be talking about. The junior-senior relationship is very important in Japan. An employee who is younger and probably hasn't worked at a company as long as his older coworker will be a junior to the senior. More experienced employee. It is the same for students, especially in school clubs. So, if any of you, I'm pretty sure anybody who listens to this podcast has probably seen those slice of life animes like K-On! uh, and just like any high school slice of life in general, where once the first years become second years, you'll realize that the first years look up to the second years, and the second years look up to the third and the fourth years, and they call them like senpais and stuff like that. Well, that's how it is, that's how it always is in Japan. That's a sign of social hierarchy, and that's everywhere in Japan. If you are in a company for a year, the new employees will look up to you and see that if they ever need help, they'll come to you and that sort of stuff. Of course, it can be seen in a good thing and a bad thing. It could be seen as a good thing because it means that it's easier to ask people for help, because if you're brand new to a company and you have no idea what you're doing, usually the people who have more experience will help you out. But it's also a bad thing because that also means that people with less experience in the company tend to not have much of a say in the company as much as, a third or fourth, or somebody who has 3 or 4 years of experience in that Japanese business. So, for example, if you think if you've been in the Japanese business, if you've been in the Japanese company, for about a year or two, about a year and a half, 2 years, okay, and you try and kind of discuss what is wrong with somebody who's had like 15 years of experience, they're probably not going to agree because they've been in the business for 15 years. They know what's going on, okay? And to some extent, social hierarchy here in the States doesn't really happen at all, really. Now, there are people who would probably look down at the people who just started, or something like what I just said, where it's like, if somebody has 15 years of experience, they're probably not going to take too much out of the person who's only had like less than a year or two of experience. But that doesn't mean that they won't like completely ignore it like in Japan. In Japan, if you're trying to tell your senpai or whatever something different about the company, more than likely they're just going to flat out ignore it. But in America, they'll kind of consider a change or two here every once in a while. But I kind of think with this whole like social hierarchy thing in Japan, it helps the business, but it also hurts businesses because if you're in the Japanese businesses, you're going to be working with everybody. So of course everybody's opinion's going to like mix in with everybody else. So it's kind of a pro with the social hierarchy, but it just depends on if you're a fan of, if you're a fan of the social hierarchy. Personally, for me, since I'm not a businessman myself, I don't know much about the social hierarchy in Japan just quite yet. That's just, my take. But in theory, the upperclassman serves as a mentor for the underclassmen, and it's the junior's duty to help out and support the senior members of the group. That's basically what the social hierarchy is in Japan. Is if you have 15 years of experience, it is your job, in theory, to help out the new employees, try to get them, get the seeds planted for them. So, in America, these don't exist. These don't exist at all, okay? In a way it does, because, if you're brand new to the job, somebody's going to have to help you out, because... sometimes. There are some companies that absolutely don't give a damn. But in Japan, it is, you got to help them out in some way. Okay, it's your job as a senpai to help out the underclassmen or whatever. So, like I said, if you've seen slice of life animes like with high school, or even there's some business-ish slice of life animes out there somewhere, I, they'll show off this social hierarchy to a huge extent with all the senpais and stuff like that. Especially K-On! If you watch K-On! Because of the fact that the first years become second years, and then they get the new member early on in the series. So, and you gotta the upperclassmen have to teach the underclassmen how things work. So, like I said before, it just all depends on your stance on the social hierarchy if you want to move to Japan to deal with that, or if you rather not. Now, like I said, this episode's going to probably be a little short, or at least possibly less than half an hour long, but I could be wrong. I don't know. By the time I'm editing this, I'll probably be less than 20 minutes, to be honest. I hope not. I don't really like short. I don't like short podcast episodes, but this last one here that I'll talk about, I'm pretty sure everybody knows about this in general. So this one's probably the most common out of the three that I'm talking about today. And that is that people in America tend to be more direct and blunt, whereas Japanese people are more... They're the complete opposite. I'll say that. I'll say that much. The thing about moving to Japan is that when you move to Japan, the biggest thing you'll be learning is you'll be learning how to read the air, sort of say. Because Japanese people try not to be so direct or blunt, because in a way they see that as rude. This can be seen in body language too, of course. People in the United States are taught to look directly in someone's eyes when speaking or listening to show that they are actively participating in the conversation. In Japan, extended eye contact can be uncomfortable between people who aren't close, and eyes are often averted. Japanese people also tend to be more reserved than Americans, and they share less personal or sensitive information, even with close friends. This is why drinking parties are such a big thing in Japan, okay? When drinking parties happen in the business side of Japan, everybody goes to them, for the most part, okay? Unless you're not so much of a drinker. When these drinking parties happen, this is where 9 times out of 10 Japanese workers will open up. This is where Japanese people will actually start, like, showing their more revealing side, I guess. Sharing off their personal feelings. That's completely normal in the Japanese world. That's completely normal. Here in America, we say everything just completely, like, we spitball it, okay? If we don't like somebody, we're not afraid to hide it, okay? We'll share it out to the world. If we hate somebody, we'll share it out to the world. If we like somebody, we'll be extremely direct. Japanese people, not so much, because they consider it to be rude, I guess. I think that I'm trying to figure out the exact reason why, but as somebody who really doesn't have much, Japanese experience, because I don't live in Japan, I'm guessing it's just because most people want to keep a low profile in Japan. That's what I'm assuming. I could be wrong, but most people just, if they just want to live their daily lives as an average salaryman or something like that. Now, there are people in Japan that, are direct. There are Japanese people that don't like the whole, concept of keeping silent or whatever. But since there's so little, those people often get shut down. Okay? People who tend to speak their minds often end up getting shunned out. They often they become like one of those weird guys. Okay? They often get sent to a corner or whatever where no one's allowed to talk to them or whatever because they'll be too direct and they're too rude or whatever. You see these all the time if you look up like certain YouTube videos about Japanese culture and Japanese people in general, where people are like, if you speak your mind, you are not going to be seen as a good person because you're going against the culture. If in a way, it's kind of like, uh, in a way, this is kind of like how Americans are. But in reality, it kind of feels like it's the complete opposite. If you're too quiet, you become shut down because you're too quiet and you're too reserved and you're, not going to be a fun person to talk to because, you're too shunned. You need to open up more. But in Japan, you kind of get friends by doing that, in a way. It's like, it's completely, it's weird. Um, and I saw a video on YouTube just a few days ago about the hikikomoris in Japan, the shut-ins. Uh, I watched a video about that a couple days ago, and it's way more of a thing in Japan. That's why they're called hikikomoris. In Japan, they're way more over there than over here in America because it's like people really don't like being blunt in Japan. Because if you are blunt in Japan, you're going to be shut out. You're going to be, you're not going to be involved in many groups and stuff like that. There are several cases where that is not the case, but like 80% of the time, that is the case in Japan. Whereas here in America, like I said before, you could spitball anything, and if people agree, then you get a little group together, and the next thing you know, you get more friends by spitballing opinions that are popular, of course. And then there's also people who spitball unpopular opinions that also get popular. Those happen. And in a way, I guess that's kind of why like the Japanese people are seen as like silent people, because they don't want to be blunt. They don't want to be direct because they think that they'll be rude. Or it is rude, I guess, in the Japanese culture. And, if you were a foreigner moving to Japan or going to Japan, you gotta read the room. You gotta learn how to read the air. Read between the lines, as they say. Because somebody will say, that your Japanese is good. The best way that I can put this, somebody can say your Japanese pronunciation's good, but in reality, it's probably the shittiest fucking pronunciation ever. It's probably just as bad as mine. I'll be quite honest. When visiting or moving to Japan, the one thing every foreigner should learn what to do is read the air. If you think that something is not right, 9 times out of 10, it's probably the case. That's probably not correct. Something must be going wrong, I guess. I don't know. But from my personal experience with reading a bunch of Japanese articles and reading a bunch of culture-ish things about Japan, that's why I'm known as a certified Japanaholic. Any foreigner that moves to Japan, they've always had issues with reading the air. They've always had issues with, people not being too direct. Especially in, the most simplest of cases. They just want a simple answer, but they can't get that simplest of answers. Okay? I think there's several cases where the gaijins, or the foreigners, will be all, asking just a simple question, like, does this look good on me? A simple question such as, does this dress look good on me? Should I get this suit? Would this make my boss happy for the interview? Japanese people just will not give them a very blunt answer. Not yet, at least. Now, I say not yet because these 3 that could be considered major cons in Japan are slowly, I want to say slowly, maybe very slowly, like snail speed slowly, not becoming much of a thing anymore, especially the social hierarchy, because the social hierarchy is mainly a thing in typical Japanese businesses, but in other Japanese businesses where they cater towards more the foreigners that come to Japan to work, they'll get rid of the social hierarchy. They'll get rid of the whole... There's sometimes where Japanese people will be more blunt with the with the foreigners because, of course, they're foreigners. They're more used to people being blunt, especially if they're Americans, of course, because, like I said before, Americans are blunt. Americans will say whatever they want, and they will not have any second thoughts about it. If it comes into their mind, they'll spit it out. That's the thing about Americans. That is definitely a con about America, is that sometimes things could be said that need to be left unsaid. And Japanese don't second think anything. They quadruple check everything. It's like, all right, I think I'm gonna say this. Should I say this? I don't know if I should say this. Should I say this? Whereas here in America, it's like, I'm thinking I should say this. I'm just gonna say it. Not give it a second thought. Just speak it. Okay? Put it on Twitter. Put it on Facebook. Put it on Instagram. Put it on Snapchat. Put it on, anything else. But sometimes it's better not to say it. Oh my god. It's better not to say some things. And in a way that makes the Japanese culture better, because the reason why Japanese people are seen to be the nicest people on earth, I'm not saying they're not, because they are a lot more friendlier than the Americans and British people. No offense to any Americans or British people listening, unless you agree with me. But the reason why Japanese people are seen as the friendliest creatures on earth, is because of this, the topic of the fact that they're not direct, they're not blunt. Well, most of them aren't. Okay? They're not going to spew out anything without a second thought. Okay? They'll spitball anything they want to say as long as they A, think about it, and B, trust you. Okay? Because even they don't want to tell their personal friends, their closest friends in the entire world, almost their families, about their about like sensitive issues or whatever. Because in a way, okay, if you look up like the mental health issues in Japan, or if you look up the emotional issues in Japan, okay, look up videos and look up articles about this, you'll see where it's like, if anybody says anything about personal issues in Japan, instead of people helping them, they're like, I hate to use this keyword again because I've used it like 10 times already this freaking episode, but shut out. That's why hikikomoris are so popular in Japan, is because if they have like sensitive or personal issues, they can't say anything because it just creates more of that same issue. Now correct me. Now the thing is correct me if I'm wrong on any of this information, or if you have different experiences. Tell me about it, because I'm willing to take any feedback. I'm willing to take any criticism, especially if I'm wrong. Especially if, there's some information where I could be wrong about this information. I've seen, now, I don't want to brag, but I've seen way too many, like, good things about Japan and so many bad things about Japan that, I could almost talk about everything that I want to talk about in quite in depth. Any subject, I guess. But there's some subjects, of course, I can't get in depth on if it's too, like, Japanese-ish. Okay, because, like I said before, I still live in the States. So I don't necessarily have much Japanese experience yet. But to go back on the whole, the main topics that I talked about today, with the hierarchy, the Japanese people being more subtle, and the fact that the Japanese is more of a collectivist culture. Okay, these three are like, they can be taken as pros for many people, or you can take them as cons. Okay, personally for me, it's a mixed bag. Okay, the collectivist culture I can see as a pro for me because I work okay by myself, but I also work okay with other people. The social hierarchy for me, I see it as a con for like anybody who works in a typical Japanese business, because sometimes your opinion just flat out doesn't matter. Okay, if you are an underclassman, your opinions sometimes just don't matter. and sometimes your ideas will just get thrown out of the books in a snap of a finger. But that's also, it could also be a pro in some cases. I want to bold that word up real quick. Some, okay? And the Japanese being more subtle compared to the Americans is, to me, a con, but also a pro. A con because sometimes I want a direct answer, especially if it's like a simple question. Okay, if I ask, like, a simple question, I don't want a subtle answer. I don't want, something that makes me want to go through, like, my romantic teen comedy snafu style ish, kind of like read between the lines kind of thing, where I have to like deeply think about that answer. It's like, okay, I asked if this dress was good on me, but she didn't give me a clear answer. I gotta think. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Come on now. Just give me, if I ask a simple question, and if I seem like I'll be offended if you say no, just say no anyway. I'm not gonna be offended. Come on now. Come on now. Because I'm an American. I'm used to people being direct and blunt. I'm used to people giving me the straightest answer, even if it is the sharpest, most deep-cutting answer they can give me. That'll hurt even the strongest of person. I don't care. Just freaking... just give me an answer. But I see it as a pro as well, because I understand why people in the Japanese culture are subtle. Not a lot of people like to speak their minds. I can see it both ways. They don't want to cause trouble, and that's fine. Because here in America, since we're direct and blunt, there's a lot of trouble that comes from that. I'm not going to admit, I'm not going to lie, that does happen. That does happen. But in Japanese, in a way, that's kind of why there's not a lot of issues, is because people are not as direct, or they're subtle. Okay, there are, of course, some Japanese people that are direct, and there are Japanese people that are blunt, but at the same time, I can see why the Japanese people are like the way they are. And of course, there's hundreds of different cultural differences between the Japanese culture and the Western culture. And I could go over many of them later in a different episode. But I just wanted to go over these three that I found to be more... This is like more the business kind of side-ish of the Japanese culture. So if you plan on moving to Japan and working for a Japanese company, yeah, you do want to know about these three, of course, because if you don't, you're really gonna have some issues. Okay, so especially if you do plan on working at a typical Japanese business. There are some episodes that I have planned for the future. I did run a little, I guess a thing where I asked people over on my Twitter at the Japanaholic 1. Go and follow that if you haven't already. I asked people on Twitter to give me some overrated animes that I should talk about. And I got some pretty good ones to talk about. Overrated animes are... oh, they're everywhere. Alright. And I don't know if that'll be the next episode. Maybe the episode after the next episode. I'm trying to think as to what was going on. I had a few more episodes planned, especially with Brody. I was going to make an episode where we went to the mall and we walked around Barnes and Nobles. We walked around the mall and we just like looked around at a bunch of Japanese stores that were in that mall. But not only is half the audio missing from that trip, which sucks because there was a lot of good stuff about that trip, but the audio itself kind of sounded terrible, and especially the Barnes & Nobles, it was very quiet, and I don't like that, because not only does that give me the ASMR feel of the podcast that I never want to have, because, let's face it, I hate ASMR. My voice cracked. Did you hear that voice crack? I'm sorry about that voice crack. But I also... well, after the Barnes & Nobles, it got extremely loud. There was a lot of background noise, so I couldn't do that. And then we were going to do a review on the Made in Abyss movie, Dawn of the Deep Soul, that was planned on coming out later this month, Or actually, it did come out now by the time this gets uploaded. But, you know, COVID 19. Canceling everything since 2020, including this trip to Japan. Now, the plan for the trip to Japan is possibly now going to be in either August or September, maybe July at the very earliest. We're not going to take it in June. Well, we may, but like June is a 10% chance. July is like a 80%. Well, July is like a 60% chance. August and September is more the 80-90% chance of happening. Okay, so when we take that trip, you'll know. We'll give you more information on that. I do have like other topics that I want to discuss here too, but if any of you also want to request any topics for me to talk about, please go ahead and just let me know anywhere. Let me know on Twitter at the Japanaholic1. Let me know on the YouTube side of things, on the YouTube channel Taylor the Japanaholic. Just let me know anywhere, and I'll discuss basically any topic you want me to talk about, whether it be anime, whether it be Japan in general, or games, because, you know, one of my most favorite podcast episodes was where me and Brody discussed gaming stories and gaming nostalgia, while his two dogs were almost barking every other sentence that we were trying to spit out. Go check out that episode if you haven't, because that was a fun episode, even though it is possibly the longest episode of the podcast. So, thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Japanaholic podcast. If you did enjoy, and if you are new, click the follow button on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, anywhere you listen to your podcast. Check out the Twitter page at the Japanaholic1. Follow the YouTube channel if you haven't yet already. Taylor the Japanaholic. If you are listening to this on the YouTube side of things, click that like button. Please hit that subscribe button with the bell turned on for any notifications, whether it be my Beat Saber videos, whether that be my NASCAR Thunder 2004 videos, or whether that be literally any other videos that I decide to upload. And I will see you guys next Wednesday on the Japanaholic. See you guys next Wednesday on the Japanaholic podcast. My name is Taylor, the certified Japanaholic, signing off. Good night.